Hello, everyone. If we haven't met, my name is Will Stewart, and I'm the Executive Director of Stay, Work, Play New Hampshire, a statewide nonprofit whose mission is to attract and retain more young people here in the Granite State. And I want to thank you for joining us today for DEI BIPOC in the Outdoors, part of Stay, Work, Play's ongoing Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion series. Our DEI series features events to foster conversation, enable learning experiences, and push for change. And it is our hope that our conversation today will help us to do just that. Before we begin, I'd like to thank Dartmouth Health, Bangor Savings Bank, and the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation, our sponsors for the Stay, Work, Play Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion series, as well as the Nature Conservancy in New Hampshire, which has contributed to today's event. Without their support, today's event simply would not be possible. And to say a few words on behalf of Dartmouth Health, I'd like to introduce Angelica Ladd, Dartmouth's Community Relations Specialist for External Affairs. Angelica.
Hi, thank you. Good morning. Thank you to the team at Stay, Work, Play New Hampshire for hosting this important event. As Will said, I am the Community Relations Specialist at Dartmouth Health, and Dartmouth Health is proud to support diversity, equity, and inclusion, especially in areas related to health and well-being. And there's really nothing better for your well-being than enjoying the outdoors. I grew up in Manchester, which isn't exactly New Hampshire's capital for outdoor adventures, but I will never forget the day that my mom packed me and my 4 brothers into our beat-up minivan to visit the old man of the mountain, rest in peace, and splash around in the frigid waters of Echo Lake. That and all the trips to Crystal and Glen Lakes and Rye Beach imprinted outdoor life into my DNA. Then I went to school at Plymouth State University, and all of New Hampshire was suddenly accessible to me, and it was amazing. I hiked my first 4,000 footer, camped in the Lost River, and failed at learning to ski because winter sports just aren't for me. Now, as a mom of 2, I'm the one loading up my family for trips to New Hampshire's lakes, beaches, and trails. And yes, I'm bundling the kids up for skiing adventures with their dad. I just hope that my girls will grow to appreciate and love New Hampshire's recreational resources the way that me and my husband do, and that it becomes a part of their DNA. I'm so happy to be here, and Dartmouth Health is proud to sponsor BIPOC in the Outdoors as part of Stay, Work, Play's DEI series. Be well, everyone.
Well, thank you so much, Angelica. And again, thank you to Dartmouth Health, Bangor Savings Bank, and the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation, as well as the Nature Conservancy in New Hampshire for their support of this very important topic and this very important conversation today, which we're going to get into here in just a minute. Before we do, I want to introduce our moderator for today. Sheila Vargas is the Community Partnerships Manager for the Nature Conservancy in New Hampshire. And Sheila coordinates and manages the Nature Conservancy's community engagement program with the goals of building authentic relationships, building conservation awareness, and connecting people to nature. Welcome, Sheila.
Thank you, Will. As Will said, my name is Sheila. My pronouns are she, her. I work with the Nature Conservancy here in New Hampshire on the ancestral lands of the Abenaki people. And for those of you not familiar with our organization, we're actually a global nonprofit whose mission is to preserve the lands and waters on which all life depends. And we do envision a world where people and nature thrive together. So here in New Hampshire, our portfolio actually includes protecting over 300,000 acres of land. We also do oyster restoration work in Great Bay. We work on curbing the impacts of climate change across the state, and of course, working to connect people with nature, which I think is the most fun part. For anyone interested in getting involved, I'm happy to put my email in the chat so we can connect after the event. Even if you want to go out for a hike or a walk or anything, just let me know. So the Nature Conservancy is really excited to be sponsoring this event for a number of reasons. And I just want to acknowledge those really quickly. The first is that as a predominantly light-skinned organization, both globally and in New Hampshire, we have so much to learn about the individuals and communities that have been actively ignored and excluded and forced into the margins when it comes to conservation work and environmentalism in general. I know many of my colleagues are actually in the audience on this call today. Hey guys. And over the past 3 years, we have started to just scratch the surface of what it really means to do conservation work in a way that's inclusive and equitable. The second reason, just really quick, we're excited to be sponsoring this event because we know financially supporting the communities that have been ignored and excluded is necessary and important. And we have a lot of work to do catching up on that side of things. And just lastly, we're working towards ensuring that the individuals who enjoy and recreate on the over 300,000 acres of land that we have helped protect in the state are as diverse as nature itself. As we all know, nature is not homogeneous, so we want to ensure that all who visit the areas that we steward and protect feel welcome, safe, and understand that they are just as entitled to connect with nature as anyone else. So with that, I just want to say I entered the environmental world later in life. At 26, my first time was visiting Yosemite, and I realized the glory of nature. I'm originally from Puerto Rico. Growing up, I never saw any Latinas represented in outdoor activities, outdoor marketing, none of that. So I'm particularly excited to be moderating this on a personal level as well. And I do want to turn it over to the panelists now that are joining us today. I'm only here to guide the conversation, and I'm really excited to learn from Ruth, Ben, and Cindy. So I will actually start with Ruth Castillo.
Thank you, Sheila. I'm really excited to be here too, and I'm excited to be with all the participants and my fellow panelists here. They're people that I respect a lot. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Ruth Castillo. I am Mexican Honduran. And before coming to the United States, I grew up in Honduras until I was 18, but I came to the US for university. I wasn't really exposed to what we're discussing in this panel as outdoor recreation. The outdoor recreation that I was exposed to was more in relation to like agriculture. And so, and it's like that in like a lot of Latin American countries, that the concept of outdoor recreation just like doesn't really exist. It is just actually in recent years that this idea of outdoor rec, like we are discussing here today, has evolved in Honduras, and I'm seeing a lot of new communities coming up, and a lot of love for being outside and people. And so I became initially involved in outdoor rec while I was attending the University of Maine, and one of the 4 women in my engineering program was involved with the outdoor rec center, and she brought me in and she showed me the climbing wall, and I had no idea that people climb walls for fun before that. But then she took me on my first like true as we define it here, outdoor experience. And we went to hike Mount Katahdin, and we camped and we climbed. And that was like 10 years ago. It was a really great experience for me. She really introduced me to the outdoor recreation world in a very great way. But I guess like what really like piqued my, I know this is going to sound crazy, but what really piqued my interest into outdoor rec was like, as a kid, I'm sure everyone here knows the channel Nickelodeon. That was a show called Rocket Power. And on that show, I mean, that show was so formative for me. It was the first time that I had seen people do things that I didn't know that they could do before. Like, I didn't know that people surfed. I didn't know that people like went to play in the snow with these things strapped to their feet. And I learned about a country called New Zealand that you can surf and you can snowboard and you can hike all in one day. And it was, I think, particularly made an impression on me because there were brown kids in that show. It was like one of the few cartoons that had brown kids and Hispanic kids in that show. So that's kind of like how I started in this, and I don't want to take too much time, but now I live in New Hampshire, and moving here has really opened up my, kind of like similar to Angelica, like moving up here has really opened up my ability to engage in more types of outdoor recreation, like more hiking, more swimming, more trail running, skiing. And before that, there was just other constraints because I was living in Boston, and so like the most accessible thing there was the climbing gym, access to the outdoors, like coming to New Hampshire. Like, I tried to come as much as I could and recreate here, but this cost associated with it, there's transportation issues associated to it, like all these different barriers. And so that has changed now that I live here. And it also provided other opportunities for me to become more of an activist in this area. Before I, did climbing coaching and mentoring and provided clinics for women in my community. But now I'm continuing to do that sort of like on the side, but then at the same time, like I am now part of the board of Summits in Solidarity, which is an org who works to dismantle white supremacy in the outdoors. We raise funds for other organizations that are doing the on the ground work to increase access to the outdoors for underrepresented folks. So things have changed quite a bit since I've moved to New Hampshire.
Thank you so much, Ruth. I can say as a fellow Latina, I'm so glad that you're here and enjoying the outdoors. And it sounds like we need to do some kind of like rocket power brewery power hour at some point with Stay Work Play in the future, because that would be pretty fun. I'm sure it's on Hulu somewhere. Cindy, can you introduce yourself?
Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Cindy Sue. I use she, her pronouns. And I just want to very level set. I am feeling slightly under the weather, but Victoria's giving me the energy and the psych that I'm feeling through the screen. So thank you so much. So I don't actually live in New Hampshire, but I do recreate a lot in New Hampshire. I go up to New Hampshire every single weekend. I try to go as much as I can. And run and recognize that a lot of the recreation that I do, which is I'm an avid rock climber. So I really cut my teeth in rock climbing in New Hampshire. That's where I really found my passion, found my roots is in New Hampshire. And I have had the grateful opportunity to be able to access all of those spaces, recognizing my privilege to be able to access a car, access funds to be able to get the gears necessary to be able to recreate up in New Hampshire. So just in solidarity that's where I'm coming from. But I am an avid rock climber. I've been climbing for about 9 years, and I love this relationship that I have with rock climbing to the outdoors. But before that, my relationship to the outdoors actually comes from growing up in suburbia in settings similar to towns. I think because I live on the border of New Hampshire and Massachusetts, similar town settings in lots of neighborhoods in New Hampshire. So, but my relationship to the outdoors really started when I was really young, being able to just go outside and play with all of the neighborhood kids and be able to go adventuring. So I think when I think of recreating, it really started when I was a little kid. But thinking about structured activities outside really started after I was able to gain access to a car as a teenager. And then I have a twin sister. And so when we both got our car, we were really excited to be able to go to New Hampshire to do the big adventures, go on the 4,000er hikes. So we were really excited to be able to start dabbling in a lot of those types of outdoor recreational activities. And then transitioned into a lot more rock climbing as I became older, mostly in college age times. So my relationship to the outdoors really comes from just this connection to nature and being able to feel connected with fresh air, fresh water, just being able to feel the grass in between my toes, sun on my skin. And when we're thinking about outdoor recreation, I think that relationship is really different than my childhood as just being able to play outside, because I think that's everybody's childhood. I think that's what every childhood should have some components of having that connection to nature. And when I'm thinking about BIPOC experiences, also want to really level set that I am first generation Chinese American. I identify as a non-Black or brown person of color. I think it's really important to distinguish that when we're talking about centering the most marginalized identities in these conversations, and recognizing that my positionality is important to be able to have these conversations in the communities that I'm in, and to be able to talk about anti-Blackness, and think about anti-oppressive work within my own communities in relationship to BIPOC conversations about how to recreate safely outdoors. So that's my intro before I go into tangent. And I'll pass it back to the moderator.
Thank you, Cindy. I know you don't live in New Hampshire, but it sounds like you're an honorary Granite Stater. So we will take you anytime you want to come just a little north of the border. And I'm going to hand it over to Ben now.
Well, hello, everyone, and thank you so much to the rest of the panel and for the host for having us and for having this conversation. I think this is an awesome conversation for New Hampshire, and thank you all so much. Quick, a little bit of background about me. I'm a transplant from North Carolina. I grew up on a big farm down there, and when I was 12, my parents moved to New Hampshire, of all places. I fell in love with New Hampshire and fell in love with the state. And it wasn't long before I was snowboarding and chasing all the other outdoor adventures with the rest of my friends here in New Hampshire. My first job was actually teaching snowboard lessons at Ragged Mountain. So shout out to Dan Egan for back in the day. This guy got me started. Anyway, so back then, it was amazing to just kind of, the outdoors was a way to get away from my family, to also be, learn skills. I grew up as the oldest boy of 4 other little kids. So we were all really tight together. And so it was really tough to escape your siblings, except if you went really far outside. So I got good at getting away. I loved hiking, I loved biking, I loved swimming. We still do quite a bit of those activities today with my family here in Campton. I loved it so much I came here for college, and I still work in recreation. I'm fortunate to work and teach for Alpine Winter Sports Academy, where I teach English, and my students get to compete all across the world in alpine winter sports, whether it is freestyle skiing or snowboarding or alpine racing, and hopefully pursue their dreams at Division I colleges and world championship level competitions upon graduation. So I've been really fortunate to have this relationship that I do with the outdoors, with outdoor recreation, to be able to make a life, to support my family, and to have a home and call it more than just a hobby. You know, the outdoors has kind of been a sanctuary for me as well. That's my dog, Luke. He loves the outdoors as well. But anyway, before I get to talking too chatty, I'll pass it back to the moderator. Thank you guys for having us.
Thanks for that, Ben. And hi, Luke. You're welcome here as well. Dog friendly zone here today on the Zoom. So really quick, before we get into like the really deep questions, I just wanted to give you all some space to talk about any specific organizations that maybe you haven't mentioned that you're involved in. I know you all listed off a pretty lengthy outdoor resume, but just wanted to leave some space for that in case there's any that you forgot or that you want to speak briefly about a little bit more.
I can jump in. Hi, folks. I forgot to, Cindy here speaking. I just want to uplift Brown Girls Climb, an organization that I'm a part of, and they're a national network with regional like leaders that host meetups. And I also want to uplift Arcturus Boston. I'm one of their ambassadors. I do a lot of initiatives doing meetups as well for rock climbing. So hopefully I'll be able to bring that outdoors soon with a potential certificate that I'm pursuing.
Thank you, Cindy. Ruth, Ben, anything?
Well, I'm wearing this Black Lives Matter t-shirt, but I'd like to shout out Black Lives Matter Seacoast here in New Hampshire and Black Lives Matter Manchester and my own organization, NH Panthers. We're all kind of working together to highlight and promote the stories of Black and Brown and Indigenous people of color here in New Hampshire, and help fight to end racism as we see it in all its appearances, not just in outdoor recreation. But thank you guys.
Thank you. Ruth, any?
I briefly mentioned it already, but I'm part of Summits in Solidarity. I'm one of the board of directors, and Summits in Solidarity, we just recently had our fundraiser, is an organization that works to dismantle white supremacy in the outdoors by raising funds for organizations that are increasing access for underrepresented folks in these spaces. That goes beyond just like white supremacy doesn't live in a silo of outdoor recreation. Even in order for people to start thinking about outdoor rec, there are other barriers in life that they have to go through. And so part of these organizations that we provide funds to also work towards that as well.
That's great. I definitely am planning to connect with all three of you after. So as Victoria said, I'll be sliding into your DMs. So look for that. So our first question, I'm actually going to have Cindy kick this one off. So the question that we have here is, people of color in the outdoors have experienced microaggressions and or exoticizing, which is noting someone appears from a different community. Being treated as if they don't belong outdoors. Can you share an experience, and what do you think others can do to make the outdoors more welcoming and inclusive for BIPOC folks?
Thanks so much for kicking it to me. I think this is a really important question. I can speak to an experience that I had once where I was climbing with some other Asian American women, and we got to ask the question, like, are you a competent climber? Very directly, like, are you competent? Do you know what you're doing? And this is me, somebody who had been climbing for a few years, just sharing some knowledge with my friends on how to take out an active piece of gear out of the rock. And I found that it was a very frustrating experience. We had a back and forth, and it was just not a great experience. So a takeaway, I think, from that situation is just to mind your own business. I feel like there is this genuine desire to connect with other people. I really think that is totally fine. Like, people want to connect. And I think there is a line of like, why do you need to know how competent I am outdoor climbing, or how competent I am doing this thing, when it doesn't affect you? Genuinely different than like, oh, I'm interested in like what you're doing. Like, can I learn a little bit more? Like, it sounds like you're doing it this differently. I think it's a different line, right? So I think having a total normal conversation of like, hey, how are you? How are you doing today? Is different than straight up asking that question. Like, what are you doing? Like, are you confident? Do you know what you're doing? So straight up, like, just minding your own business is really important. I think along the same lines, I think what people can just do, not just like non-BIPOC folks, but just everybody can do, is just like work through implicit bias. I think there's this really, especially I think for me, I can just speak to the climbing world. There is this gatekeeping around knowledge, around like certain brands that you need to have to be considered legit. So I think working through your implicit bias on like what it means to correctly recreate outdoor needs to be some internal work. Think about some experiences that you might be having at the crag, or just like when you're at the parking lot, or even at the gym when you're like judging people's shoes or judging like what they're wearing. That's like just working through your own implicit bias on like, what does it mean to correctly recreate outdoor? And just, again, minding your own business on what other people are doing, especially if it's like people that you're like, ooh, they're not the same people that I see at the crag all the time. That's so exciting. Straight up gawking and just like watching people is just so weird. And not engaging in any conversation on like why that's happening. Yeah, just like just straight up mind your own business and stop staring at people is really important. Pass
Yeah.
back to the moderator.
That makes a lot of sense to me. I feel like we could use that advice in other areas of life as well. But I'm really glad that you brought up, what does it mean to recreate outdoors correctly? Who created these systems of what is seen as correct, right? And I just want to pass over the original question to Ben. I saw you come off mute, and then Ruth, if you have anything that you'd like to share around this whole exoticizing a specific community that you may not normally see in the outdoors.
Thank you so much. There's a term in skiing we call Joey, right? And if you haven't been out, you're kind of categorized as a Joey. I take my family out, and my son, who's now 15, and he ski races himself, but I'm usually with the younger two, and the term Joey gap refers to if your goggles and your helmet don't quite align. So there's a Joey who can't ski very well, and then the Joey gap is when your equipment doesn't fit just right. Getting off the lifts, often I'll hear, these terms tossed around me or my children. And never mind that I've ridden at Waterville Valley for 18 years, but I'm really good. Nonetheless, I'm expected to not be very good. I'm expected to struggle, but my kids are actually very good as well. But we hang out on the lower slopes. They're 5 and 7 when they started learning. Now they're 7 and 9. So they're starting to progress from the bunny hills to the blue slopes. And so they're right on track. But when they hear these phrases, it's kind of intimidating for them. They want to prove themselves. And I'm just, my heart's racing. I'm like, slow down, my babies. But it's the outdoors is a safe space, or should be a safe space for everyone. And sometimes there are those barriers that we have. I know that I've become sensitive to making sure my children's helmets line up just right. Their gear is, as new as it can be, because I don't want them to have to feel less than while they're recreating, or have to prove themselves, to anyone but dad, so that they can enjoy themselves in the outdoors. But that's just my experience.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that very personal example of, what it feels like to feel almost completely excluded in the outdoors, which is a place that no one should feel that way. Ruth, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think this is kind of a big topic for me, because it goes back to talking about like classism in the outdoors and how that stems from white supremacy. And I have very personally experienced that in the climbing community specifically. And that feeling of being otherized, as soon as you say something or you look a certain way, or whatever it is, like people like, that look that people give you that makes you feel like you don't belong, or makes you feel less, or makes you feel otherized. I had one encounter with this white cis male in a climbing area, and I've known this person for like a few years, just from like seeing them in the same place like constantly. And they stopped to say goodbye, and I was reeling at the time, because I'm also a photographer. So I had just photographed a climbing event at this area, and I was photographing it with another like woman of color, and I was really excited about that. It was the first time that I had done that, and it was an amazing experience. And we started talking because he was going to say goodbye, and he was still in his car, and I was like on the side of the road. And so all of a sudden this conversation escalated about how, you know, how like their view of like what a woman is not what I defined as, like, it, they basically like diminished my experience as a woman of color because they don't see color. And now that all these new terms are being thrown around, it was such an incredible effort for them to have to think about their language around folks that aren't white cis male. While all of the while not letting me say one word in like the 25 minutes that he like talked my ear out. So that was a very, I would say that was a very traumatic experience for me. And I think one thing that I want folks to take away is that we're all learning, and like the first step is to like educate yourself on how to be inclusive, what kind of language you are using, what your behavior is. And there's a lot of resources online that you can use and to learn. But really the change comes when you actually put that knowledge into practice and reflect. And one thing that I want folks to like, one thing they can do is that if you're in an outdoor area, and similar to kind of what Cindy, kind of like going off of what Cindy was saying, is that think about your bias, but like think about it in a way of like, if you have a thought that comes to your brain that is a thought of judgment, just acknowledge the thought. It's okay to have the thought. You know, it's hard to change our brain patterns and the way that we've been conditioned in this society. Acknowledge it, put a pin on it, go home, analyze it, really think about why you were thinking that, talk about it with your peers, talk about it with other people, and then learn from that experience. Because ideally, I would love a world where people can show up as they are, as they are and as they come, and not immediately be judged by like the size of their bodies or the color of their skin or what shoes they're wearing, like Cindy was saying. Because that judgment, those like small thoughts that we have in our heads that are driven by ego and and this idea of classism and white supremacy, just further creates division in the outdoor community. So if we were to come in and just recognize that this other person's experience is just as valuable as mine, like just because they're doing something different and their version of outdoor recreation doesn't look like my version, doesn't mean that they're wrong, doesn't mean that they're inferior, doesn't mean that they're any less than. They're a totally whole different human being. Like they're a whole other person outside of you. And I think people just forget that. They get into themselves and they're like, well, that's not the way it should be, you know, but it's like they're a whole other person and they can do whatever they want, you know, as long as they're being safe, you know, like from a health and like perspective, you know, like they're not like, you know, putting other people in danger or anything like that. Like people should be allowed to create their own mold. And one thing that I want to take, like, that I really want to impress on like new folks coming into this community is that you can create your own mold. It's hard because you see other people and you feel like you don't know what you're doing, and this is the first time you're doing something new and it's uncomfortable, so you follow the pre-established mold. But you don't have to do that. You can create your own version of the outdoors, and that's okay, and that deserves just as much respect as the person who's doing all the New Hampshire 48 or the person who's climbing 515 or the person who's doing an ultra marathon. Like, you know, outdoor recreation looks different for different people. And you know, some people, their version of outdoor recreation is like playing chess in their porch, and like that's okay, you know. That's
I
all.
love that. That was a lot to take it. I mean, Ruth for president, am I right at this point? I do want to move on, but I want to thank you all for unpacking that question. You know, as the first question of this call, you all mentioned it's very complex. You all took different approaches to answering that. I feel like we could have a whole hour on just that question, but I certainly learned a lot, so thank you very much. And I just want to move to the next question, and I'm going to start with Ben on this one. Is there anything that can be done to create more allyship to the BIPOC outdoor community in New Hampshire. And personally, as an employee of the Nature Conservancy, I'm really interested to hear what you all have to say about this, because I know there's often a fear of tokenism. I hear this a lot, of saying, well, we want to be very cautious about going into this relationship. We want to take our time. We want to go slow. How can we create an allyship with BIPOC communities in the outdoors in a way that is authentic and is not tokenizing?
Oh, absolutely. This is a great question. I like I said, I work in a school, and I work in a alpine winter, sports, which is predominantly not people of color. So when Martin Luther King holiday comes around, or the month of February, it becomes a little bit uncomfortable for me, because I'm kind of required or looked at to represent the Black voice or the Black experience in America, which is very awkward. I'm one of 2 Black employees at my school, but the positive things that I see happening are this real awakening to the shared narratives that we have always had, the shared histories of success, and even of struggle. I think the ways that we are having this conversation right now are part of the things that we're doing to see people in Black and brown, people of color, queer peoples, as already part of that collective. As we kind of look back over the history of our sports, we can find ways to celebrate the diversity that's already inherent in it. I'm thinking of in alpine sports, for example, the sports are driven by someone doing something just a little bit different, to go just a little bit faster, go just a little bit bigger, to just one more 180 or just one more degree of rotation. There are a lot of ways in which we can celebrate those narratives that do exist in our sport. And I'm seeing a lot more of a recognition to find and promote and share those shared narratives that we do already have. The struggles I think that I'm experiencing, and then other people of color may also experience, is that when you want to be rewarded for the value that you bring to that institution, not only with your own skills, but also if the institution is going to use you as your like diversity or your personage, the institutions also then want to kind of then play this double game where then you're just like everyone else. But actually, no, you're special in this occasion, and we really want to hear your voice, but actually, no, we're not going to reward that voice when it comes to the retention, when it comes to advancements, or when it comes to ways to further your education or further your craft. I feel like there's a fine line where we could do more as broad institutions in support of diversity to promote that diversity that's already in-house, to pay that diversity that's already in-house, to do more to help that diversity excel in the things that they are already doing. That the institutions are just kind of, they'll lip service too, but when it's, time to do the civil rights dance, or to give a land acknowledgement, or to, do the other things that diversity is really excellent at promoting. And I'm sorry to be so bland about diversity, because I think diversity is a word that has so much complexity and depth that goes beyond race and ethnicity and gender, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But just for right now, I'm just going to use it for Black, Indigenous people of color. Our institutions could do more than just provide lip service in the form of dollars, in the form of enhancement, in the form of retention.
Wow, thank you, Ben. I was vigorously taking notes. So I would love to hear from Ruth and Cindy on this as well.
Yeah, I think I echo a lot of what Ben said. I see a lot of great organizations, institutions, companies that are really working towards promoting diversity in the outdoors. But I think there's two things. If you don't manage how that's being put out into the world, it can come off as tokenism and being performative. I'll give you an example. Yesterday on social media, I saw this outdoor organization that was partnering with an outdoor clothing brand, and they're providing a scholarship for BIPOC and underrepresented groups, filmmakers, photographers to like get into that, because the cost to be able to do that craft is very high. But then in another Instagram story, I saw how the same organization that is putting towards this scholarship is requesting photographers for their national events with no pay. And it's like, really? Like, you're providing a scholarship for folks that are underrepresented to do photography, but then you go around and like your other programs that you as a organization put out in the outdoors for outdoors people, your payment is food for the weekend. I mean, it's disappointing, it's insulting, and that's the cohesion that I'm talking about. Like, if you're going to do this on one side, make sure you're backing it up throughout your entire organization. And then on the flip side of that, being able to support folks internally in their own diversity within the company, like not what you put out with your marketing, but if whatever your marketing's being put out for diversity, it has to reflect internally, because it doesn't matter what you put out if the people that are doing the work for your org don't feel supported. Like, having a manager that understands the intersectionality between being neurodivergent and being an immigrant, like, that's huge, because that's going to help them be able to manage their employees better. And just being open about having these conversations, like just having a candid conversation about like, what are your communication styles? What are some things that like, that are perhaps obstacles that we can work through? How does your culture influence how you work and how you interact with other people? I think that's really important, and something that companies haven't fully like wrapped their head around.
Thank you, Ruth. I also loved that you brought in communication styles into this answer, because I know personally, I have a communication style that can come across, I think, a little aggressive when I start talking about people of color in the outdoors and stolen land and, racism in the outdoors. And I think it can be offensive to power up white cisgender people. And so that's something else that I've been really cognizant of, is how I'm communicating around this, but also making sure I'm not sugarcoating too much. So Cindy, go ahead. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I just also want to add that is interesting, that it's like the aggressive tones and you're just dropping facts. Just want to uplift that. One thing I do want to add to that, this specific conversation, is that there is no checklist to allyship. I think a lot of folks just want like checklists. This is what I have to do to be an ally. This is what I have to do to make sure that we're not racist or oppressive organization, or just individually, like how I cannot be racist or oppressive. I think it's really important about it's relationship. It's about intentionality, about doing your own work on unlearning bias, learning your history, learning a little bit more, not just from like the internet, but from like people too. You can learn so much from the internet, but it's also about building relationships with people too. So that's what I'll add to this conversation.
Thank you, Cindy. I'm actually going to hand it right back over to you, Cindy, if you're okay with that, so we can talk a little bit about safety for communities of color in the outdoors, which is a huge topic. Again, one that we could talk about for a whole 60 minutes. I'd love to hear if you could share some extra obstacles to safety that BIPOC communities might face, and then some possible actions that others in the outdoor communities could take to create more safe environments for folks of color in the outdoors.
Sure. Thanks so much for passing it back to me. I'll try to keep it brief, being mindful on time, and want to have the other panelists to share as well. I just want to be mindful, thinking about what's happening in the world with reproductive rights in our country right now. When we're thinking about safety, we also need to think about our personal safety, our emotional safety, our spiritual safety, as well as our physical safety. I think those are really important. Safety looks really different to people. We can't make broad assumptions about what safety looks like. Yeah, we need safety equipment, but how do we make sure people are safe? And if folks are familiar with what my background is, I am a social worker working through a trauma-informed lens. So I think that's something that is always at the front most part of my mind when I'm recreating outdoors and recreating with other BIPOC folks in my community as well in the outdoors. What does safety look like? Like, have that conversation, and then think about what things can be done when we're recreating outdoors safely. Some possible actions, like very basic stuff, is like getting gear. Like, how are we sharing gear with people who might not have the specific like physical safety gear that they need to be able to recreate outdoors? For instance, if I am rock climbing, there's just some basic checklists that we actually do need for like safely recreating and like going rock climbing. But then how am I, as somebody who has more experience, who has some connections to, like, I have the connections to be able to get that like stuff, that information. But somebody who's just starting out is not going to be able to get that info, right? That's like intergenerational knowledge. That's just like inter-community knowledge. So really mentorship is really important. I think that is like key thing is mentorship. Just go out of your way to share out the knowledge. Like, take that gatekeeping information away. Take that feeling of having like you had to work really hard to get here with your knowledge, and just like don't let anybody suffer to get there too. I think mentorship is super important. I think something to just also be aware of too is like the internet. We often talk about like the internet. You can just like Google things. You can just like look at things up online. But internet is actually not equitable. Not everybody has access to the internet. So I think that's just something when we're thinking about like route maps, topographs, or whatever, like maps that we need to find online. Or even when we're thinking about paying fees at the parking lot, that is often now like an online resource rather than like cash deposit, or like, can you please invoice me once I am done recreating? So I think there's just like different avenues. There are a lot of different obstacles, and those are just the few that I just want to like uplift.
Absolutely. I appreciate you bringing up entry fees. We've run into that a little bit with our Transit to Trails program that we're running from Manchester to trails around the greater Manchester area, because to power up folks who are financially stable, $5 or $7 per person to get into a park on a debit or a credit card seems laughable that that's a barrier, but to some it is. So again, another implicit bias thing that to really unpack. Ben, I saw you come off mute.
Yeah, thank you. With safety, I think there's a couple of different levels that we can talk about. And I think Cindy was touching on some of these. You know, there's like life or death safety things that you just have to have. You know, if you're boating, you have to have a life jacket. But or if you're climbing, I can't speak to climbing, but you know, if you're snowboarding or skiing, there's certain things you just have to have. But then there are other barriers when we look at safety that are just part of that perfectionism that kind of goes on in the background. You know, when you might be policing rather than in the name of safety, rather than just like looking at safety. And I think one of the ways that we can work to be better is sharing resources. I work with an organization that tries to share resources through whether mutual aid or through direct aid outlets, so that we can find ways to promote people in the industries or give people that actual physical gear that will ensure their safety when they are recreating. But then also just doing a little bit better with my own kind of biases. When I look at my children, when they're playing out in the snow, am I just thinking about them being safe, or am I policing their fun in the name of like policing their fun? So those are just the kind of two different levels I think we can all as a society be more aware of as we interact with each other in the outdoor space.
Thanks, Ben. Wow, this is a great list, I feel like, that we're developing so far. Ruth, any additions?
Yeah, part of what Cindy said was like emotional and mental safety. And I think that kind of goes back to the example that Cindy gave when like people are gawking like in a outdoor recreation area, or, they approach you. And I think for me as a woman, like there's certain things that I just like won't do when I'm outside. Like if I encounter a person, like I don't tell them where I'm from if they ask. Like I just like divert the question because I'm scared, especially I love where I live, but especially in northern New Hampshire and more conservative areas, you never know who you're gonna find. And then just going back to what the themes that we've been talking about your own bias and thinking about your judgments that you're thinking in your head about other people and how that projects into an actual behavior. Like, if you're a man and you see a woman alone on the trail, like think about how you're going to approach her, if you're going to approach her, and why. Like, do you really need to, that for me is really scary. Like usually, I mean, I recreate outdoors like after work, like, short little things, and it's when there's one other car on the trailhead and just me that I'm the most scared. And then again, I think someone said on the chat, like, having networks and supportiveness goes back to like thinking about your own biases, but like don't invalidate someone else's like perception of what their safety is. You're not them. Like their safety could look different than what you think your safety is, because of their life and their experiences and whatnot, right? All the intersectionality. So just being mindful, it goes back to that, like checking your biases and your privilege and that like sort of deconstructing the conditioning that we've been put on in this society.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ruth. I do want to be mindful of time. I also just like want to thank the folks who are having a great conversation in the chat. And I also want to acknowledge that while we feel like we could have this conversation around a campfire for days, it's very emotionally exhausting to be sharing these personal experiences. So just a huge kudos to the panel. Please treat yourself to an iced coffee or whatever it is after this. And the last question that I have here before I hand it over to Will to close, because we do have a hard stop at noon, is around gear. So access to gear and a lot of the social economic barriers that we discussed a little bit, those are a huge obstacle for BIPOC communities. And so I'm curious to hear if you all have any solutions, or if you know of how, the outdoor community or organizations like the Nature Conservancy can support the BIPOC community and actually getting access to some of the gear needed.
Can I jump in real quick? I think something that's really important is, I think I've been seeing this a lot, like really on Instagram, is just gear hubs, like just gear rental hubs near certain areas that are like where lots of people recreate. So I think that would be a really great opportunity to just like, if there is an opportunity, this is it, right? To have a space dedicated for like gear rentals. We got like our ski shops, we got like REI that does a lot of the rentals, but really thinking about like community wise, if you live near a trail and lots of folks like, oh snap, like need perhaps like micro microspikes, or like maybe they broke their hiking pole. Like this is a really good opportunity for communities to get together and really start thinking about like building gear rental hubs, and finding a way to do that in like a community space. And not saying that there is no value in doing that from a corporate stance, but thinking about like, how do we do this in a multi-pronged solution?
Absolutely. Ben and Ruth, any last words on either the gear, or we can even shift to some closing remarks?
As far as gear, I'm really fortunate. I live close to the college I went to for undergrad, and my college has this opportunity where if you go to them with your ID, you can just get any equipment and rent it at any time. And what a privilege, but that's a huge barrier for most people of color. Most people aren't like myself, and so the need for gear is real, and it is one of those barriers that people, I know, for example, the ski swaps around my area that I go to regularly to get skis or ski equipment for my kids are one of the best ways to update their gear every year. But those are the things that just knowing about, knowledge and information is power, that kind of thing. Just availability, but also our personal connections. One of the things that I'm finding is using my social capital, using my privilege to help support other people is also kind of one of my responsibilities as someone who has found success in this industry. So that is my kind of close. I want to lend my power to help open up the space for other people to come back through the door that I went through as well, and to be able to make it proliferate as well. So thank you guys for having me.
Thank you, Ben. And Ruth, go ahead.
I just want to say one quick thing. One thing that you can do right now is you can donate to orgs that are doing this type of work. Like they are providing equipment and gear for folks that are underrepresented. I have a few like organizations listed: Elevate Youth Boston, Young Women Who Crush from New York City, Vermont Adaptive Sports, Adaptive Sport Partners of North Conway, More Women Surf, they're from Portland, Maine, Climbing for Change, and the orgs that we're part of here as well, Brown Girls Climb, NH Panthers, and Summits in Solidarity. So that is a change that if you're looking to educate yourself, that takes time. But if you want to make some change now, put money where people really need it.
Thank you, Ruth. And I'm going to hand it over to Will now to close this out. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Sheila and panel. What an engaging and illuminating discussion. Thank you, Sheila, for moderating today, and thank you, Ruth, Ben, and Cindy, for sharing your thoughts and perspectives with us today, for being vulnerable and really helping to us to have this conversation. I'd also like to thank everyone who joined us today and took part in this robust discussion. And on behalf of the Stay Work Play team, which includes my colleagues Kamini Jorgensen and Victoria Carrington, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it was worth your time and attention. And finally, just want to give a quick shout out again to Dartmouth Health, Bangor Savings Bank, the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation, and the Nature Conservancy in New Hampshire for their support of Stay Work Play's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion series. Learned a lot today, and I know we have some resources we'll be following up with for everyone who registered. And again, this conversation is being recorded today and will be put up on the Stay Work Plays YouTube page very soon, so we can go back for some of the, if you want to rewatch and share with any colleagues or friends who you think might have an interest. So with that, thank you again for joining us today, and have a great day, everyone.